joined by Julian Langer, who is an eco-anarchist, eco-pessimist, dark green environmentalist, and an author. Welcome, Julian.
Hi.
All right. So where do we begin? Gosh. Well, let's first talk a little bit about green anarchism. I guess it goes by a lot of different terminology, but ultimately it's this notion that it's not just about human liberation, but that it's some form of non-human liberation as well, and that it aims to bring about environmentally sustainable anarchist society. Green syndicalism argues that human liberation and animal liberation are inseparable, and that when you think about our social ecology, that the hierarchical domination of nature by human really stems from the hierarchical domination of human by human, which is very interesting, actually. And I do want to talk a little bit about some famous writers and poets such as Henry David Thoreau, as well as Élisée Reclus, and their positions on some of these topics. But why don't you start us off? What are we talking about here?
So it's a very broad spectrum of ideas, green anarchism. I would generally call myself an eco-anarchist rather than a green anarchist, because green is very much tied to a whole bunch of political ideologies, which I myself don't entirely agree with. So you have the social ecologists and the green syndicalists, who are what you'd call perhaps techno-optimists, who are very optimistic about the potential of human intervention and humanity's ability to create positive change, which fits a very progressivist notion of the world and culture. And then you've got the kind of what would be kind of the more primitivist, nihilist, kind of eco-pessimist kind of positions, where it's very skeptical about human ability to create positive change, if you want to use that term, and to control the world in a way that is desirable, which would be kind of where I'd fall into. But yeah, it's a very broad term with various factions in the way that lots of ideologies have sub-factions and ideas, and
Yeah, I think one of the things that I read getting ready for this interview is that there is just a general kind of, I think, an accepted assumption that a lot of the externalities that we're seeing as it pertains to climate change is the sole result of humans, and it's really our fault. And one of the more extreme statement that I read around the ontological anarchy, no, I think it was actually around hard green, is the fact that bioregionalism is that we need to right our wrong, and that even if it's at the expense of humans. So there are some pretty interesting and, like I said, very diverse and kind of extreme sets of things that are out there. But let me start with this first. Henry David Thoreau, his book Walden, which I read during college, advocates for simple living and self-sufficiency among nature. And that's part of the reason why he literally lived out alone in his cabin. And he was very much against the rise of industrial revolution or civilization. So in today's era of modern society, what does that mean, and what is your position on things?
What that means will potentially be different for every individual. For myself, what it means is I live in the British countryside, about as far out as you can get realistically, and I'm surrounded by kind of trees and birds and little river and stream and everything like that. That's my world, and I choose to live in this environment. I think the thing that's important about Walden is it's less about the building that he was in and the things he had in that building. It's more about the environment that he put himself in, where he chose to live, choosing to live outside of an entirely urbanized space. One of the other things in terms of today, what's different from Thoreau's time, is the intensity of industrialism, it's the intensity of urbanization. So there was a lot more what we call wildness. when he was, when he was writing Walden and when he was living out on Emerson's land. So we live in a, there's much less of that space available. So that sort of lifestyle is less easily accessible for people. But for me, it doesn't, you don't have to go out and live in the middle of, in the middle of the countryside or kind of in a forest to rewild or to kind of get that, maybe not to the same intensity, but get that qualitative experience. Because the idea that we have actually separated ourselves from nature, that we are, civilized, whatever that means, is kind of, I call an illusion or a phantasm, to use a Freudian term, because really nature is here, it's everything. There's wildness, the air circulating in this room is wild, it's out of my control. Climate change and global warming is very much, what we consider wildness, and nature just kind of forcing its way back in, like destroying this kind of illusion that there is a distance, there is a separation, because it's right here and it's immediate and it's out of our control in a way that is wild. So I'd say that the idea of that distance between urbanized space and ourselves, while you can do it, and I try to do it to some degree, isn't a good one, because we're actually never out of contact with that.
So if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is this notion that somehow in our human society, our modern civilization, we've constructed these large, cities and all the steel building skyscrapers and so forth, that kind of separates us from what nature is, and somehow we think that we're insulated from the elements of nature, and that our actions have caused the fact that no, humans and our society is not inseparable from nature. And because of there's a cause and effect, we're starting to see the implications of climate change back into our society, that we've done so well to try to protect from the likes of hurricanes, from the likes of floods and drought. And we're finding that we're quite vulnerable to those elemental things.
Yes, the world that we constructed to separate ourselves, from the world that is the human world, civilization, cities, urbanized space, and all that. The idea that we built this world that's outside of that world, the kind of Hobbesian social contract, all that, the city built, in my experience and my belief, is a falsity, and that's what kind of climate change trauma and anxiety is. It's the kind of to use a Lacanian idea, it is the real, the traumatic real, just destroying that reality that we've built to kind of create ourselves, to make ourselves safe.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word trauma. That's trauma, what we usually associate with that of humans, but here there is trauma to nature. Now, I just want to explore a couple of concepts. One is bioregionalism that was purported by Elise Reclus, where he basically asserted that we should not interfere when it comes to bioregions, and they shouldn't be centralized managed. So really, when we think about zonings and permitting, for example, or designating certain specific areas for forests versus urban or suburban, these things should not happen. Ontological anarchy takes it even further to the fact that, again, maybe you can explain a little bit around no state can exist in chaos, that all ontological claims are spurious except the claims of chaos. What does that all mean? And in the notion of chaos, because I believe some of these branches don't believe in true chaos theory, who is to blame for climate change, and is it even okay for humans to organize themselves to not only strive for zero carbon footprint, but negative decarbonization?
Okay, I'm going to try and break that up into different bits. So in terms of bioregionalism, I'm not going to try and talk for ontological anarchy in kind of, in a universe that this is what all people who are interested in that idea and that practice, kind of say this is my thoughts and kind of what I feel is what a lot of people will agree with. So first, in terms of bioregionalism, so in terms of the way that human intervention can affect a bioregion, the idea of human intervention and human management comes onto the idea of, you know, territorialization, the idea that we can form these territories, these bounded spaces, and we are able to control what's going on there, which has, you know, appeared to have worked for a certain amount of time, but the level of destabilization within the, you know, within the ecosystems that's occurred from that is very self-evident. Now, the post-structuralist philosopher Deleuze talks about deterritorialization, which has become a part of post kind of structural decolonial politics and the way that we look at those sorts of issues. The idea of humans letting go and colonists letting go of colonized spaces, of humanized spaces. So the idea, for me, the idea of bioregionalism, you know, the idea that we can manage these spaces is not something that I entirely find myself with. What I find is a bioregion is, you know, an ecosystem. It's very self-managing. It just spontaneously erupts through the free interactions of the living creatures that are there. It's not something that requires human intervention. So I don't know if that's answered your question. To go on to the next thing about chaos. So I think you're quoting Peter Lamborn Wilson there, probably. Now, I myself, I don't believe in chaos or order. I think that's two kind of very loaded terms that don't have a lot of weight to them. In that chaos kind of implies order, and order kind of implies chaos, which implies the need, you know, the same thing of, you know, civilization and wildness out there, civilization in here, that same distance and separation, when all that's happening is just what is, as opposed to these dualistic systems. And I've lost about can you remind me what it was?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand your perspective, your specific perspective. So maybe you can tie it back to some of the writing. Does your writing, for example, your book Feral Consciousness, Deconstruction of Modern Myth and Return to Woods, does that get into some of your perspectives? Again, just trying to understand what exactly is your perspective, and what is there a call to action?
Okay, so in terms of my perspective, I don't write very much on bioregion. It's not something that I cover much of. I don't write much about things like habitat management. I write mostly about the rewilding of social interactions, about psychic warfare, about sabotage of everyday interactions and sabotaging equipment. So things like, I'm in my activist practice, I am a hunt saboteur here in the UK. So I've smashed badger traps before, which is one of the things that, you know, I don't explicitly write about that in my book, but I'm talking about sabotaging in the way that, you know, Earth Liberation Front and Earth First groups and Animal Liberation Front groups have done for decades. And what I write about, as well as that, is things about radical skepticism and epistemological anarchism. So the idea of, you know, what do we believe? How do we believe what we believe? What do we know? How do we know what we know? How do we know that climate change is going on? How do we know that science is a way of proving this? We don't really know that science is a way of proving this. And the whole idea, one of the things I personally try to challenge is the idea that we have this knowledge about what's going on in the world, when really everything is very confusing, particularly things like climate change, where it undermines our ability to understand all the processes entirely. Have this kind of, because it's scientific thought is very reductionist, it reduces things, but what climate change brings in and global warming brings in is this whole deconstructed mess of, what's going on? There's so many things and so many variables and so much, and it becomes very confusing. And the idea that we can reduce this conversation down to simple, scientifically statistical data is something that undermines a lot of ecological thought, because ecological thought and experience is actually very touchy-feely, and it's very sensational, it's very immediate, it's not rational and cognitive and something that we can understand in a humanistic sense of understanding, like it's something that humans can control, which is what the Industrial Revolution was, and Enlightenment thought and scientific thought is the idea that humans can understand this world that's out there, separate from us. We're distance. We're looking at it from neutral distance, scientific gaze, when really we're flesh and blood and animals, and we're instinctual, and we have our passions and our desires and our loves. And I have a desire that is very egoistically embodied in my in me. I can feel myself kind of when I'm walking out where I live. When I get to the woods, I have a strong pull of kind of I'm wanting to go in there, and it is a sensational personal thing. It's not something I've rationalized. I've gone, I want that out there. There is something that makes sense in my, I figured out this thing, this is good for me in a very logical way. And in the same way, ecological thought and thought on climate change, in my opinion, what I try to bring through my writing is ecological thought is actually, what do I desire? What do you desire? I don't desire a world that is, burning because of fossil fuels. I don't desire a world that is going through that. And I have an experience of the world that I'm in. And while, of course, the scientific data backs up my experience, and the scientific data, there is a value to that data. The reason why I have a disgust towards, I'm going to change it, not disgust, a revulsion, to play with Albert Camus' revolt, towards the processes that are underway in the world that are, that are leading to all these emissions and the plastification of the world. It doesn't come from this kind of rational, logical way that we can understand things in clear senses, which is the way that environmental thought is very much done. It comes from an aesthetic, instinctual thing in me, which is personal. And my challenge is, most of what I do is I'm looking to challenge a lot of the mainstream environmentalist discourse and green discourse, and especially the green anarchist discourse, because I'm very disappointed in most of it, because most of it, we alienate the people we're trying to meet with all these statistics. We go and all these things, 500,000 blah blah blahs died because of something that some evil person who's miles away from me did, and you read that and you go, oh my god, that's horrible. Oh my god, there is nothing I can do. I'm impotent in this situation. No. And it doesn't do anything, unless maybe someone votes for the Green Party. Maybe that happens, but the Green Party, they're not going to get into power. What I want to bring, and kind of what I want to bring to your listeners and bring through my writing, is something which suggests taking environmentalist praxis and making it much more immediate, much more personal, much messier, much more confused, much less something that's so purist and puritanical in a kind of very religious sense. We have a lot of beliefs that we're very invested in, which I share with most people who I'm accusing of being religious in their approach. But we come at it from a very dogmatic way, and we don't meet people in ways where we just go, why don't we want mass extinction? We don't want mass extinction because we want to still be able to hear birds sing, and we want to still be able to breathe the air and it be breathable and it not kill our children. That's, sorry to ramble for a while, but that's kind of what I try to bring with my writing.
Yeah, I think for the listeners or the viewers, in terms of the simplified takeaway is this, that it's not necessarily wrong to be rational or to look at data or to look at statistics. However, I think to your point around the ecology, the experiential ecology, is that when we actually experience it ourselves, and it's really not very far, it's not something that we have to go to another continent to experience. We simply, you know, I think as of recording this time, this is June, so people are on vacation. So when they go on vacation to lakes, to oceans and resorts, they should immediately experience the fact that there's a higher bacteria count in the waters, or that they are running up against rubbish like plastic and straws. You know, Europeans are complaining because the temperature is too hot. I think there are, you know, some places are not only 30 Celsius but reaching 40 Celsius. So it's the things that's immediate, that's experiential, that the human body, not just the intellect, can experience. And to your point, there is a reason why many global citizens spend time in nature, whether through camping or through Sunday walk in the forest, because we are very much integrated. And I think that's the point that you're trying to ultimately make, is that we should not try to create this artificial separation. We are very much part of the bigger environment. So when we hurt it, it hurts us, and ultimately it affects all of us. It's a net zero. So the point of actually that you're making in some ways, and you may not like to hear this, but it's actually great marketing, because what we see in media is a lot of the data and the rhetoric, things that's fairly distant. It's an aspect of our brain, but it's missing the piece that actually converts into action. And it's when we make it personal, when we can actually have a touch, an extension of it into the world, that's when it's meaningful to us, and that's when we're actually willing to change and do something about it. Am I completely off?
No, there's very, very, very similar to what I am saying, if not kind of what I'm saying. I would say, first thing, I'm not saying that there is a wrong way or a right way with any of this. The idea, one of the things I have challenged through an essay that I wrote for another podcast is this idea. So I don't think things can be reduced. I don't think we can reduce things. Things can be reduced, but reduction is mass extinction. Reduction is the depletion of the biosphere. We don't want reductive thought. I don't want reductive thought. I like deconstructive thought and complexification, which is messier and fits kind of my experience of ecology. So reductive thought, kind of, if you bring it down, ultimately you get to maths and you get to things where you get a wrong answer and a right answer, which is the way we like to look at things. There is a wrong answer and there's a right answer, mathematical way of looking at things. 1 + 1 is not 47. 1 + 1 is 2. Makes sense to us. That's the right answer following the sequence. I don't think that there is people doing the wrong thing. I don't think there's people doing the right thing. I think there's people doing things and people living their lives and being messy, confused, you know, people trying to live however that means to them, wherever they are. Ultimately, what environmentalists have to, in my opinion, question is, what does it mean to live at the end of this world, whatever this world is, whatever that means to be living at the end of this world, because mass extinction is the end of a world, and we are living at the end of this world that we've known as it is. In terms of the marketing, yes, very much. I'm kind of wanting to challenge the way that the whole discussion is presented in a way that I want people to find, you know, ecology sexy and beautiful, and find a kind of joy that I find in an immediate sense of my own experience of the world. Whether or not that's marketing, I don't know. I as someone who is kind of quite fiercely anti-market, in all senses, I do have a degree of uncomfortableness with that. But whatever, screw my comfort. You know, the world's burning. Screw Julian's experience. One of the things that I particularly like, and it's an idea I'm exploring more recently, it's something I've only just started thinking about, is this idea of paneroticism. So, which I first came across through another anarchist writer within kind of the traditions that I've kind of grown from and right within. A guy who's for this he went by the pen name of Feral Fawn. So paneuroticism, which would be the idea of not pantheism in a pagan sense of there's this theological other out there, but paneuroticism about the sensual, personal love and desire in a very primal, animal way of loving the world, not just kind of, not ecosexual, though not ecosexual as well, but that whole thing of just falling in love in a very aesthetic way. I want to see something of a kind of an artistic turn in environmental discourse, where rather than writing articles for The Guardian or other media sources which only environmentalists read, write songs and plays and poems and create sculptures by destroying sculptures to symbolize the ruination of whatever it is you're wanting to symbolize the ruination of, and create beautiful portraits, but not human portraits of trees, and something like that, where we're moving the discourse away from this kind of this whole kind of rational scientific model, which is alienating and stunting and has not worked for decades. But the thing that we as people who are engaged in this discourse and who care about this, the thing that we're not accepting is that what we're doing is not working, and what we're doing has not worked for since there was some stuff that has had small scale improvements. So there's some stuff, some victories have happened in specific local areas, and that's great, that's cool. And and in terms of the larger discussion, it is a big discussion because it's an existential threat for the entire world. But our approach to this has not succeeded in stopping the mass extinction from happening. It is a battle we are losing. So let's stop what we're doing. Let's do something different. Let's try and meet people in a different way. It's kind of what I'm wanting to bring. And with that, it's as much as it's got to be sexy and beautiful and kind of desirable, it's also got to be horrific and terrifying in the way that a horror film is horrific and terrifying, but it is still desirable. And we still go out to watch horror films and to learn, that stuff happens in the world. We watch slasher films to see that people die and can survive. Sorry.
I know you don't like the term marketing, but I think you will be tremendous for messaging and PR, because you're right. I mean, when you look at Instagram and people's travel, what they highlight it's the nature's beauty. It's the sensual aspect. It's the aestheticism. It's what they experience as a human in their environment, in their context, good and bad. And I think the ability for us to be able to actually share that, it connects us at a much deeper level. And I think you're right. By changing the narrative, changing the positioning, we are able to actually have more effectiveness. And I think what you're really aiming for is changing that narrative for efficacy, for change, because whatever we're doing, the policy, the data, the rationalization, the deduction, all of this, you're right, it's kind of making some percolation around protests and things, but it's really not fundamentally changing the game. So I really appreciate the perspective, the intellectual rigor that you bring into today's conversation. I have been joined by Julian Langer, who is a eco-anarchist, eco-pessimist, dark green environmentalist, and an author. Julian, it's been a real pleasure.
It's a pleasure to talk to you too.